Hi guys, in this episode of Shri series, we're going to be talking about right angle trigonometry and solving questions involving sine. Alright, now if you looked at my previous video, I gave a brief theoretical understanding and explanation of how we solve right angle trigonometry, particularly putting emphasis on this concept called Sohcahtoa. All right, and like I said before, in right angle trigonometry you need to identify my three sides. So one is your hypotenuse, O is my opposite, and A is my adjacent. So these are the three lengths of a right angle triangle. All right, and then we use sine, cosine, and tangent. And just a bit of a recap, so sine theta is opposite over hypotenuse there, cos theta is adjacent over hypotenuse, and there's some space, I'll just move that up there, tan theta is opposite over adjacent. All right, so this was the basic explanation that I gave in my previous video when we talked about introduction to right angle trigonometry. And I earlier promised that in the next set of videos we're going to be practicing questions, because maths is not just about knowing your theory, but how do we apply that theory in the respective question. All right, so what I'll do here is I'll rub this and then we'll go and solve question A and question B. All right, so like I said, always remember when you're solving questions, you need to identify what is being given, what information has been given, and from that information, how can we find what is required in the question. All right, so let's look at question A here. We told to solve for x. All right, now what information do we have here? Now we've established that it's a right angle triangle because of that square there. All right, now that length 10. All right, now we could say centimeters or meters, or let's just put it as 10. Is that the opposite? Is that the adjacent? Is that your hypotenuse? Now, like I said before, the longer side of a right angle triangle is referred to as your hypotenuse. So what is 10? 10 is your hypotenuse. That's your edge. Actually, let me use, it actually changed color. I wanted to use a different color. All right, so let's put 10 as your hypotenuse. All right, now we've got angle 38 degrees and we're told to find x. Now, our question is that x opposite or adjacent? All right, so we need to identify. Now, in my previous video, I did mention the length that is directly opposite to the angle in question is referred to as your opposite. All right, so what you can see here is we've established the two sides here. We've got your hypotenuse, that is 10 centimeters, and we are looking for the opposite, which is x. All right, so the last bit we need to find out is what ratio links opposite over hypotenuse. All right, so if you write down this formula here, so Sohcahtoa. All right, so we need to find out what ratio has opposite and hypotenuse. Definitely not Toa, definitely not A and H, but in this case it's so. All right, so we're going to be using the sine formula. We're going to be using the sine ratio to help solve the equation in here. All right, so we're going to be using that sine ratio to solve the equation here. All right, so what do we have in this concept here? So we've got opposite and we've got hypotenuse. So what we're going to do is, the way to approach this is to say sine theta is O over H. Because always remember, we need to follow the process. And one of the steps in following the process is to write down the formula. The sine ratio is opposite over hypotenuse. The next thing we now need to do is substitute. So in place of theta, we're going to put 38. In place of O, we're going to put x. And in place of H, we're going to put 10. All right, so let's go for it. So sine 38 is x or O. So sometimes you can put O, but I just put x there just to show that we were trying to work out what x is. X over 10. All right, so what we've got now is we've substituted the formula and replaced the angle with 38, and we've replaced hypotenuse with 10, and x becomes O. All right, so we're trying to work out O. Now, if you remember your basic cross multiplication, all you simply do is that's the same as 1. So x is 10 times sine 32. All right, so that's, that's one way of explaining. So that's 10 sine 38, sorry. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm just going to move this here. So there's some space there. And I'm just going to rewrite what I just wrote previously. So x is 10 sine 38 degrees. All right, now we need to use a calculator because off the top of my head, I don't know what sine 38 is. All right, so these questions require you to use a calculator. Now, if this was a non-calc section, you just simply leave the answer like that because you can't go any further. So in this situation, we need to work out what is sine 38, and the answer we get, we times it by 10. All right, so I've got my calculator with me. So that's going to be 10. And what is sine 38? Sine 38 is 0.616. All right, so my answer is going to be 10 times 0.616. So that's 10 sine 38, which is 6.16. All right, so my answer now becomes 6.16. Now, if that is meters, we could put 6.16 meters or centimeters. All right, so that is how you work out. All right, so I'll just put this boundary line here just to show you how we need to work out questions involving trigonometry. Now, if you look at this question A, let's just dissect this a little bit. We know 10 is my hypotenuse. We know that x is opposite to the angle 38. So therefore, we're going to be using SO because that's opposite of a hypotenuse. You write down your formula, all right? And then you substitute it with what we've got. So the theta becomes 38. Your x becomes O. And then your h becomes 10. All right, and you just simply work out what x is, which is 10 times sine 38. You use your calculator to work this out. All right, now you can see that when you're working out x, obviously x is your length. So your answer will have to be in meters or centimeters. We're not looking for the angle. We will be talking about questions where we've been given the sides and we need to find the angle, but that's for the next set of videos. All right, so in this one here, we're using sine. Okay, now with that in mind, let's look at question B. All right, let's look at question B and let's see why is it slightly different. All right, so let's dissect question B. We know x is given, so x now becomes my hypotenuse because that's the longest side. Now, we've been given 3. All right, now what is 3? Is that my opposite or my adjacent? I think it's my opposite because that 3 is opposite angle 52, so we're going to put O there. All right, now what ratio blends opposite and hypotenuse? Sine. So what do? We write down the formula. Sine theta is opposite over hypotenuse. And we now simplify. So that's now going to be sine 52 degrees is equal to 3 over x. Now I want you to notice there's a slight difference here. All right, we are using the same ratio. So if you look back compared to, if you look at A, we're using that and we're using that. We're substituting it exactly. However, in A, we needed to find your opposite. In B, you were finding your hypotenuse. And that's why you can see the difference. Your x in A was the answer to find, and that was your numerator. However, in B, your x, which is what we want to find, is your denominator. So we can't multiply. So it's very important to pay attention to what we're trying to work out. Are we trying to work out your numerator or your denominator? Because both of them will have a slightly different approach to solving this. If you look at A, we simply multiply 10 times sine 32 because x is your denominator. Sorry, my numerator. But if you look at B, you can't multiply x and sine 32 because that defeats the purpose. We want to get x. Alright, and x in this case is your hypotenuse, which is your denominator. So therefore, what we need to do is we need to divide. Alright, we need to divide. So x, and if I was to show you the process, that now becomes over 1, and you're going to see that becomes x sine 52 equals 3, and x is now going to be equal to 3 over sine 52. Alright, so let me just rewrite that again, so in that way there's clarity. Okay, so what we've got here is x is equal to 3 over sine 52 degrees. And what we now need to do is get our calculator, because off the top of my head, I don't know what sine 52 is. Alright, so what I'll do is I'll get my calculator. 3 divided by sine 52, that's the same as 3 over sine 52, which is 0.788. And x is going to be 3 divided by sine 52, and that's going to give you 3.81. Now, if that is meters, we put meters there. All right, so that is how we work that out. 3 divided by sine 52, and that's going to give you 3.81. Okay, and it makes sense because if you look at x is your hypotenuse, and like we said before, your hypotenuse is the longest side of a right angle triangle, so therefore the value of x has to be greater than 3, which it is because it's 3.81. Okay, so you got to remember that A and B, yes, use the sine ratio. However, the final answer is worked out slightly different. Okay, in B, your x was your hypotenuse. As you can see, we worked that out. And then what we need to do is we need to divide. So it's going to be 3 divided by sine 52. Okay, because x is your denominator. We need to work out your denominator. So when you're finding your denominator, you need to divide. It's 3 divided by sine 52. If you look at A, it's slightly different. From here onwards, it's the same. But finally, what we're doing is we are multiplying. We are multiplying 10 times sine 38. So it's very, very important to really pay attention on what you're trying to work out. Your ratios become the same, but the approach to finding your answer. If you're finding the opposite, you multiply the length and the sine of the angle. In A, for example, if you're finding your hypotenuse, you're dividing 3 over the sine of that angle, as you can see there. All right. So in a nutshell, what we need to do when you're solving trigonometric questions is you need to identify what information is given. If you look at A, we've been given your hypotenuse and x is your opposite. And then we use Sohcahtoa because we're using sine, and that's why we had sine here, because we're using sine to apply these questions. And Sohcahtoa, so it's opposite over hypotenuse, we substituting it. All right, in A, we needed to find your opposite, so you multiply. In B, you're finding your hypotenuse when your opposite's given and you're dividing. All right, in my next set of questions, we're going to be solving cos and we're going to be solving tan. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye now.